Mrs. Johnston, welcome back. It is time for Knowledge and Social Studies. We are working on Unit 12, Presidents and American Symbols, and we are on Lesson 5, Thomas Jefferson. Before we begin our story today, let's go back over what we have already learned. We have learned of some very important key moments in George Washington's life. We also learned about the founding fathers. What did they do? Did you remember the founding fathers were men from the original colonies who helped write the Constitution, a plan for how the country should be run? The founding fathers decided that they wanted the country to be run by a president instead of a king. The founding fathers worked together to help fo- to help found this nation. So let's see if you understand what we have learned. Thumbs up if the answer is yes. Thumbs down if the answer is no. Was George Washington a founding father? Did you give me thumbs up? That is correct. Yes, he was. Was George Washington the only founding father? Did you give me thumbs down? That answer was no. George Washington wasn't the only founding father of our country. Each of the founding fathers had a special role to play. Each person had a special talent that helped him to help the country. In today's read aloud, you will learn about another one of our founding fathers who became the third president of the United States. That man's name was Thomas Jefferson, and one of his talents was writing. Listen for details about Thomas Jefferson's talent and what he did with his talent. I want you to consider why his talent would make him a good leader. You are learning to read and write. One day you will be able to pick up almost any book, open it, and start to read the words. How wonderful! Of course, someone wrote those words. People who write books are called authors. Author is another word for writer. Our third president, Thomas Jefferson, was a great leader because he wanted to learn more about many different things. He owned more books than anyone else in the country. He once said, "I cannot live without books." How many of you feel that you cannot live without books? Thomas Jefferson was also one of the best writers ever to live in the United States. He wrote words that are still famous all around the world. Even though he wrote them a long time ago, let me tell you about the most famous words he ever wrote. It was long past midnight. The guests at the inn wanted to sleep, but they could not. Thomas Jefferson was keeping them awake. They could hear him pacing in his room and talking to himself. Pacing is walking back and forth over and over again. Why do you think that Jefferson was pacing? He had something he had to do. He was working on a book, maybe. The guest thought, "We will complain to the manager of the inn tomorrow. She must ask Mr. Jefferson to be quiet. At least he has to stop playing his fiddle." A fiddle is a violin. "He says it helps him think, but it keeps us awake." Thomas Jefferson was a wonderful writer. He wrote about what he grew on his farm and how he grew it. He wrote about music and art. He wrote about the best ways to design and construct houses and buildings. He wrote about animals and birds. He wrote about how to be a good friend. And he wrote about the Native Americans who had come to America long before the colonists. Colonists are people who live in a colony but are ruled by another country. He wrote about nearly everything because nearly everything interested him. At the time, however, Jefferson was trying to write a very important document or paper that is now famous in American history, the Declaration of Independence. A declaration is a statement or announcement. Independence is another word for freedom. Thomas Jefferson believed people should be free to make the most decisions for themselves without a king or queen telling them what to do all the time. As he wrote the Declaration of Independence, he used an important word, liberty. You learned the word liberty in the first read aloud of this unit. What does liberty mean? It means freedom. In writing about liberty, Jefferson wanted to choose the best words so that people reading his writing would understand and agree with his ideas. Why was Thomas Jefferson writing this document? Like his friend George Washington, Jefferson thought it was time to start a new country and not be a part of Great Britain any longer. Not everyone in the colonies felt this way, though. Jefferson, along with a few others, needed to give good, strong reasons to make this big change. They were hoping to persuade or urge most of the colonists to believe the same thing. Leaders from all over the 13 colonies met to talk about what to say. They chose 5 people to work on the document, explaining the reasons for a new nation. One of the people working with Jefferson was John Adams. Jefferson and Adams were great friends, although Adams was as different as he could be from Jefferson. John Adams lived in the North, Thomas Jefferson in the South. Adams was short and older. Jefferson was tall and younger. Adams loved to talk, especially in front of a crowd. Jefferson loved to read and write, but was shy in front of a crowd. However, they were alike in at least one thing. They agreed it was time to start a new nation. Because John Adams was older, Jefferson suggested, "John, you should write the paper explaining our ideas." "No, Thomas. I have agreed. I have angered so many people by arguing for a new country that some of them do not like me. They might not want to help us start a country if they know that I wrote the paper announcing it. Everyone likes you, though, so they would be more likely to help. Besides, you are a better writer than I am. You will find the best way to say everything. So, on this particular night at the inn, Thomas Jefferson wanted to make this important document the very best thing he had ever written. In the Declaration of Independence, Jefferson wanted to explain to people that America could be different from any other nation in the world. He thought about every word before he wrote it down. That is why he was walking up and down in his room, speaking aloud the words he was deciding to use: life, liberty, and what should come next. The pursuit of happiness, he told himself. At least he began to write. On the 2nd of July, Jefferson finished his declaration and showed it to John Adams and the others working with him, who suggested a few small changes. So, with a little help from some others, Jefferson wrote his declaration. Jefferson's declaration said that every person should feel safe to live, to be free, and to decide what to do in order to be happy. He wrote that everyone, not only kings or queens, had the right to do these things. Jefferson's declaration said that this was the reason to start a new nation, the United States of America. His friend John Adams smiled and said, "I told you, Thomas, you were the man to write it." 2 days after Jefferson finished the Declaration of Independence, on the 4th of July, the other leaders voted to officially begin this new country that would be independent from Great Britain. That is why we call the 4th of July Independence Day. After the new nation was born, Americans read Thomas Jefferson's document again and again whenever they were deciding how the country should work. People in other countries said, "We want to be free too," and followed America's example by making changes in their countries. Jefferson's words about liberty changed people's lives all over the world. 13 years after Thomas Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence, and after the colonists won the American Revolution against Great Britain, George Washington became the first president of the United States. Later, when Washington announced, "I have been president long enough, let someone else have a turn," Jefferson's friend John Adams became our second president. Here, the word turn means a chance to do something in a certain order. 4 years later, Thomas Jefferson became the third president of the United States, and many people believe he was one of the best presidents America has had. Whenever he was not sure about what to do, Jefferson read the words he himself had written. They always helped him make good decisions, and they are still helping us today. Do you recognize this statue? It is the Statue of Liberty. When America celebrated the 100th birthday of the Declaration of Independence, the government of France gave the nation the Statue of Liberty as a gift for America's birthday. France wanted to show how much they admired or thought of with respect America's love of freedom and liberty, which Thomas Jefferson wrote about so beautifully in the Declaration of Independence. This statue still stands in New York Harbor. welcoming thousands of visitors each year. So, whenever you see this famous statue, remember how hard Thomas Jefferson worked to declare that every person should have liberty or be free. What was Thomas Jefferson's talent? Writing. What was the purpose of writing the Declaration of Independence? To explain why it was important to start a new country free from British rule. Name the first three presidents of the United States. George Washington, John Adams, and Thomas Jefferson were the first three presidents of the United States. How were John Adams and Thomas Jefferson alike? They both believed that they needed to start a new nation. How were they different? Adams was short, older, and liked to talk. Jefferson was tall, younger, shy, and liked to write. What were some of the reasons Jefferson gave in the Declaration of Independence to explain why we needed to have a new country? He argued that people had the right to feel safe to live, to be free, and to decide what to think and do in order to be happy without a king telling them how to live. Why is Thomas Jefferson considered a founding father? Thomas Jefferson is considered a founding father because he was the third president of the United States. He was the primary author of the Declaration of Independence, and he helped decide how the new country should be ran. I hope you enjoyed learning more about Thomas Jefferson in our story today.